Hey y'all, I'm James Wright. Welcome to my shop. Today I want to talk about frame saws and bow saws. They can be very difficult to use, but with a few understandings, they can actually be rather fun and enjoyable. Let's dive in. When it comes to frame saws and bow saws, there are many different types. And I did a short recently going through what is basically the difference between a bow saw and a frame saw. And I have a whole video on all the different types of saws where I go through many of these. And I'll leave links to those down below. But they can be kind of confusing because they're odd. There's a lot going on with them. When working with Japanese saws or Western saws, whether they be back saws or plate saws, they are relatively straightforward because your hand is right behind the blade. There's nothing else on them. Whereas once you start getting into frame saws, now there's all this other mass on here that has more leverage and can often make it hard to control. Some might say it's actually wrong to compare these to one of these. But in the woodworking tradition they come from, all three of these saws fill the same niche. These are all what you would use to create a tenon. The Japanese ryoba, you would actually use the rip cutting teeth to make your tenon. Whereas on Western saws, where it would be more for UK or French or American with the back saw, you would use a tenon saw. Whereas for continental Europe, you would actually use a bow saw. This has the same teeth I have on that and that. The same niche, just a bigger, odder saw. So why would I want this? When working with the Japanese saw, I only have 10 to 12 inches of movement, and so I'm going to be moving back and forth every 10 to 12 inches. With my large tenon saw, I might have 14, maybe 15, maybe a really big one and have 18 inches of movement. With a continental bow saw, though, I've got 24 inches of continuous movement, and so I can make a nice, long, straight cut. That long stroke is really nice because I can use my full arm movement and I can get a really nice clean cut. The problem with it is it takes a lot more skill because this thing is going all over the place and it's actually rather hard to control. But with the tenon saw, you can only go down so far. With the Japanese saw, you can go down farther, but you've got that shorter throw, and so for cutting larger joinery, this can be annoying. The nice thing is with this, I can do small joinery or I can do large joinery, and you would think I can only go down this deep, but I can take this and I can actually turn the blade, and because I turn the blade, now I can turn it horizontally, and I can cut as deep as I want to cut all the way down. In continental Europe, you'll find a lot of joinery saws that have many different shapes and sizes, different teeth. You'll find some with crosscut, some with rip cut, different sizes, different lengths, and you can do all of your joinery with a collection of bow saws. Whereas in the Americas, the only place you commonly see them are the buck saw. This blade does not turn. It is only crosscut. It's designed for bucking logs. It cuts the logs into shorter logs. You do also see turning saws, or coping saws, or hack saws. Or the one we all like to talk about, the Robot-style frame saw. Ooh. So I want to look at the continental saw, I want to look at the turning saw and the frame saw, and some of the things you can do to actually control them better and become a little bit more friendly with it. First off, they're generally designed to be a one-handed saw. You'll notice how my body is out of the way, and just like working with a panel saw, I want to keep the saw in line with my arm so I'm getting a nice, clean, smooth stroke. You want to keep the saw blade in line with your wrist, in line with your forearm, in line with your shoulder, all the way so you're making a nice, smooth stroke all the way through. You notice I'm not holding this one out here because then I'd be moving my whole body all over the place. I want to actually have the full length of my arm movement in and out. With a turning saw, most of the time, I'm going to use it as a one-handed saw. You'll also notice I'm gripping it close to the blade here rather than up top here. This gives me a little bit more control because my arm is more in line with the saw itself. But every now and then I'm working with something a little more difficult, and I might actually end up grabbing this one two-handed, and I'll lock my arms in place and move my whole body. This gives you a surprising amount of control. But with any bow saw or frame saw, you want them to be very, very tight. Tight is important. And a lot of people are afraid of really cranking them down. And you want to really crank them down. Most of them, I'm going to get a pair of pliers and tighten this down. On this one, I'm going to go to where I think it should be. And then I'm going to go one more crank. And I'm thinking it's going to explode. And that's right about the place you want it. You want a nice, good ting. When it comes to the frame saw, this I want to crank down. And I'm going to run it with the screwdriver until I basically can't do it anymore. I want it tight. That tightness really scares a lot of people. The blade is not designed to be pulled in tension by the working of the saw. The blade is designed to be pulled in tension by the saw itself. And so you can actually push it and pull it, and in both directions get the same function, the same ease of use. Keeping it tight gives you that full control. If you have it loose and it works well in one direction but then kind of bunches up in the other direction, you're going to be ruining your cut, and you're not going to have the full control even in the direction you want to go. So tightening it up gives you that full control over the whole saw and still allows you to have a nice even function. There's less chance that the saw is going to go off course, because a tight saw is a saw that cuts straight. When starting a saw, it can often be very, very difficult with these big teeth, and that kind of scares some people. So what I usually end up doing is I put the saw about 2/3 of the way along, so there's about 1/3 on the other side. I line it up where I want, I get myself in line with it so I can see where it's going, and I just lean forward. I put my body into it. So my arms, my shoulders, everything locks, and from the waist, I just lean forward. And that gives me a nice straight cut and starts it. It puts my body weight into it, so I'm not forcing it with my arms. Because if you're ever working with your arms and you're making your arms do the work, you're probably going to be going offline. With the large frame saw, I can sit here and work it with my arms, but then I'm limited to the stroke of the saw. I can only go from here to around here. Whereas I can get my whole body into it, and now I can work it back and forth. My arms are doing very little work. There's a little bit of movement in them, but most of it is just my body weight pushing the saw down. With the Continental saw, I want to be doing more with my arm movement, but I'm going to lock my whole body, and just like using the panel saw, I want my arm to be moving perfectly straight in and out from my shoulder all the way through. That's why you usually don't see these much more than 24 inches. 24 inches will give you the full stroke without having to move your whole body. When starting the bow saw, I'm going to treat it much like I would a panel saw or a back saw. With the back saw, I put my thumb on here and I actually let it slide on my thumbnail. I lift the weight off with the horn, and I just let it scratch the top until it's where I want it to be, and then I let it cut to town. With this, I'm holding the handle, but rather than having a little horn, I've got this big thing back here, and that gives me the ability to lift the whole weight of this saw up and rest it on the back of my wrist, so I can control the saw. I don't want all the weight of the saw in that first cut. I'm going to put my thumb on here, let it slide on the side of the plate, and I'm just going to let it scratch the top surface here. Once I get it established, then I'm going to let the weight of the saw go down, and it can cut very efficiently. One of the nice things about these saws is that there's a lot of weight on top, and so you don't have to put any force into it. You're just moving it back and forth. You're letting the weight of the saw do it. That means a lot of times you're actually going to have to lift the weight of the saw off. That's what that handle is there for. It gives you a little bit of rotation against it. With the buck saw, it's a little bit different. The handle is down here below, and so you're doing much the same except for you don't have that horn to run off of. The buck saw usually is a two-handed saw. You have one hand up here and one hand that comes up here or even up onto the horn. When I'm starting it, I'm often holding it on top here, and I'll get into it, and then once I get going, I'm putting my weight into it. I'm usually cutting on a sawbuck, cutting a log. That sawbuck is below me, so I lean forward a little bit, and I can put my weight down on top of it. But when I'm using this, I'm doing greenwood cutting, and I'm really making a mess. I am just hacking through a board. I don't really care about accuracy all that much. I don't care about clean lines. I just want to make the board shorter, and that's where this does really quick work to do some fun cross-cutting. When starting the bow saw, I'm going to do much of the same. I'm going to tend to hold the handle a little bit more because it gives me more control. Just like having this as the horn to hold up the weight, I find that if I hold it more like this, I can hold that weight off, and I can scratch the surface very lightly, get it where I want, and then cut into it. The turning saw is not intended to be a heavy cutting tool. It's intended to be a delicate tool that you can turn. I often find it difficult to remember to use the full length of the saw on this particular one because I want to be delicate and detailed, but you need to use the whole saw to get the cut done. It can be a surprisingly efficient saw and can cut through a lot of wood really quickly if you just let it do the work. If you're putting it into it and you're bending the blade a lot, then it's going to be doing some weird things on you. You want to try and not bend the blade, and it will actually do much better work if it's kept straight. And that's why you want to keep it in good tension so that the blade doesn't want to bend as much. Frame saws and bow saws can be a lot of fun, and I do like to pull them out from time to time because they are very enjoyable to make some cuts. And particularly some of these Continental frame saws, You can do some interesting things with them that you can't do with a lot of other saws. If I'm making big joinery, this is usually the one I'm going to pull out because it just does it very, very well. But as with everything on this channel, there is no one way to do it. There is no best tool for the job. And that's why I like using lots of different tools, because I find different times, I find different things to be very enjoyable. Sometimes I'll want to pull this out and I'll cut my dovetails off with it. And then sometimes I'll cut them off with a chisel, because I feel differently on different days. The entire reason we're in the shop is for the fun of it. So until you've tried it, you're never going to know if you find something weird fun. And so that's why I often say, if you get a chance to play with one of these, play with it. And you might find out that, I really like cutting joinery the way the continental Europeans do. Maybe I should get a couple of these and do more of that rather than back saws. And surprisingly, these are a lot cheaper than these. So, yeah, if you're looking for an affordable way, this might be an answer. Frame saws and bow saws do take a little bit extra skill. They're not quite as simple or intuitive to actually get started and do the work. Once you do, you might find that you really enjoy them. I find I really like using them from time to time, and so that's why I bring them out. I don't use them all the time because sometimes they might not be as efficient, or my skill might not be as strong with one or the other. But when I do, I really enjoy them, and they're a lot of fun. So if you would like to see more on this, I do have videos on making the turning saw. I have a video on making a coping saw, the frame saw. I don't have a video on this one because this is one you can actually buy. I'll try and leave a link to one of these down below if you want to see it. So I hope you like this. If you have any questions, thoughts, ideas, snide remarks, or things I could have done better or said differently, or things you know that I don't know, please let me know in the comments down below, because I do read through them, and that does help out the channel. Anytime you comment down below, hit the like, share, subscribe. Thank you. That really helps us. It honestly does. It gets us in front of more people, and there are a bunch of really cool people who just put comment down below. If you want to join that group, then think about doing it. Some of them even do it in some really interesting ways. But if you want to go even farther and really take it out of the park, all of these names over here, those are patrons on Patreon, because without patrons, we wouldn't be here. We are completely sponsored by you guys. Without patrons or members, people who've clicked the thank you button and help us out financially, we wouldn't be here. You guys keep the lights going, you keep everything running on Wood by Wright, and you allow me to do crazy things and put out fun videos that I like to make. So if you'd like to help out with that, think about becoming a patron. We do have special perks for all of them, and I think that'll do it for now. Until next time, have a wonderful day. So for those of you who don't know, Melody is the new videographer in training here today, and I have to ask you, Melody, did you see what we did there?
Yes, I saw it.